All right, man, here we go. Another show. You ready?
Here we go. I'm always ready, Pat.
All right.
Well, hold on. We have to. We can't just let it go. Look at this spectacular new background. I mean, geez, you look like a professional.
Thank you. I do. I have to credit my father-in-law, who's very kind, very handy, and I am not. So, yeah, I might spice up with something, but hey, we're bumping it up here, man.
It looks good, and the clean white tee just makes the whole thing
just pops.
Just pop a little bit.
Anyone listening in audio format is just getting a fraction of the quality of today's show.
It's true. Today is a treat for the eyeballs.
So let's see. Today's question is once again from the VNR community. All of you are awesome. This is from Hannah S., who I believe she wrote this in via email. Can you guys cover if it's possible to get burned out doing CrossFit? Short answer, no. It's totally impossible. Okay. Can you get burned out doing CrossFit? Or is there a way to get past that feeling? I love CrossFit. It's my passion. I usually go 5 days a week. I've been in the sport of fitness for about 3 years, and now I'm starting to hit a wall with little to no PRs. My cardio seems to be suffering when it hasn't before. I'm not getting any new skills. I just have this not motivated, burned out feeling. On a side note, this is month 3 for me post meniscus tear surgery. I just want to get back to improving, and I love going to the gym. Any suggestions? Thank you. Now, we have done a show previously on a similar topic of avoiding burnout or whatnot, so some people might want to go ahead and check that out. But this is a topic that's evergreen, and it has the injury angle, so we can dive in kind of fresh here.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of meat on the bone with this particular case. We have somebody who's been deep in the CrossFit hole for a couple of years now, has an injury, and then couched in that is, I'm a little bit, disheartened by this, it seems like, and I'm starting to see a performance decline. Now, I don't know how much the injury affected that, but I will say that 3 years isn't all that long to be doing it, even though it is significant, and, kudos for sticking with it that long. That's awesome. However, I think that's right in that zone where you're like coming out of the honeymoon phase a little bit. This is something that you're going to be doing for the long haul. Hopefully you've kind of made that recognition, but you haven't quite been doing it long enough to recognize that, life is going to throw some curveballs at you. And even if life were not going to throw some curveballs at you, it is not a linear progression from I was unfit, I started doing this stuff, and now I'm on a trajectory that just looks like a straight line.
Sad,
it's easy
but true.
Yeah. And in the beginning, even for a long time, because what you're pursuing with CrossFit is so broad, there's so many areas to get good at and to, expose yourself to. And for most of us, you're a beginner in at least several of these areas when you first get going. Because of that, you can see progress for a long time in a pretty linear type of progression. But sooner or later, that comes to a close. And I would think that this is probably what's at the bottom here, is it's just starting to creep into that time zone where the familiarity is there. All of the kind of basic gains are starting to fall off a little bit. We've got an injury on top of that. And so now we have to get into the headspace of, all right, progress isn't going to be linear. And I can't let that linear mindset rattle me and dominate my worldview and start to believe that, oh, maybe things aren't happening the way they're supposed to. So that's my take at first glance.
Yeah, and if I had Hannah here, I could pepper her with a couple questions that might help me get a little more nuanced insight, because it seems to me from reading it that if the reason for feeling not motivated and burned out was specifically the meniscus tear, then I think that would be kind of clear to her. It seems to me like she was maybe on that slide of getting burned out, and then ba-bang, I also had this happen. Now it's been 3 months. So that's how I'm reading it. Maybe she'll let me know in the comments if I'm not reading that correctly. So if I was to hear this, the first thing that would pop to my mind and I would want to address is stuff that's not flashy, but I think it's important. Okay, you're feeling burned out, you're feeling not motivated. How's your sleep? How's your nutrition? How's your life, work, stress? How are your personal relationships? All that kind of stuff that doesn't have anything to do with the 1 hour that you're in the gym. How's all that stuff going? And if, big change at work, sleep's been in the tank. Well, now that you mention it, nutrition's been a dumpster fire ever since the new year, or, there's a lot of personal stress I'm going through. All of those things are monstrously huge that I don't think, like, you can see, hey, I had knee surgery. There's this delineation. It's clear. But these things like a little less sleep, a little slide in nutrition, little more stress at work, whatever it happens to be, those are things that I think don't get the credit they deserve, but they weigh just as heavy on you as many other things. So I would look at those first and see, are all those in line?
Let me interject there too. And I think this is something that, again, CrossFitters sometimes don't have a really good handle on because we're usually pretty strong-headed, shall we say. But, when you have an acute injury, that is a drain on the system to heal that injury. And people often just disregard that. And they're like, oh, I'm hurt. It just means I just stay away from that area. And there's no other physical impact to my whole system. It's like, well, no, actually, it does take a certain amount of processing power, so to speak, for your body to heal that thing. And that's another stressor. So anyway, I cut you off.
So let's say that those things came back with flying colors. That those are not the culprit. Okay, if they are, well, great. You've just identified. Try to shore up those weaknesses, and the sun might come out again. But let's say they're solid. Then we're going to go down the road of your friend and mine. Are you doing too much?
Oh yeah.
So you're feeling burned out. You're feeling not motivated. You're doing too much, maybe of one or two things, or both. Is it too much volume, or is it too much intensity? Or is it too much of both of those things? And they could all be a culprit. If you're doing just session after session after session of part A, B, C, and D, but they're all at quote unquote moderate intensity, well, just the sheer volume will wear down a normal person. So that's probably going to lead eventually to a burnout. And then the other side is, trust me, as somebody who's rather familiar with CrossFit and is quite passionate about it, like, I understand the short elevator pitch definition that CrossFit is constantly varied functional moves at high intensity. However, that overly simplified sentence is packed with things that can take you an hour to really explain. And that last little bit, at high intensity, I don't want to say that I have a problem with that, but I feel like it can lead people down a road that doesn't lead someplace good. I personally don't think that should be misinterpreted to mean every workout, every day, every session is high intensity, because darn it, this is CrossFit and this is what we do. What's your pace? I'll tell you what my pace is: full send, and I burn it down. For most of us that are regular humans and not cyborgs, that check will become due to get cashed at some point in time in the future. So this is certainly not anything perfect. It's off the top of my head, and it doesn't have the nice same ring to it the other elevator pitch does. But I talk to people about constantly varied functional movements at various deliberate intensities. I allow myself moderate intensity days. Heck, gasp, I allow myself low intensity days. And then when the day comes that I decide to bring it, I can bring it because I'm not worn out and beat up and demotivated and just feel like I got to drag myself into the gym every day. So I know that was a lot there, but I touched on volume, I touched on intensity, and I would take a magnifying glass to those areas.
Yep, couldn't agree more. And I think an easy way to kind of quantify that is you can have high, low combinations and usually get away with things. And so what I mean by that is, if you have a high intensity program at low volume, you're probably going to be able to maintain that better than if it was high and high. If you have a low intensity program but high volume, again, that's probably relatively sustainable. But when you are trying to burn the candle at both ends and produce a high intensity, high volume program, very few people can tolerate that for more than a little bit. And that little bit may be a year or two.
Yeah, oh, sure.
And that little bit may be changing when you have a different life that has kind of unfolded in front of you. Like, for example, we were all young once, and I can remember being 25 and being like, yeah, I think I am one of the outliers that can tolerate this high volume, high intensity program. I'm it. You know what I mean? But sooner or later, the years go on, and you either find out, maybe I wasn't such an outlier as I thought, I was just young. Or, your interests change, you have other things that you want to apply your fitness towards, you don't have all the time that you want to train, etc. Something else happens, and you have to realize that those two dials need to be in balance to some degree. And that balance is probably going to change. But anyway, all that to say, you stole my line. I was going to say, solution is to start doing double days. But
Right, yeah, 100%.
No, that's definitely not it. And kind of to piggyback on that, this is something that I've said a lot on the podcast, maybe not in a little while, but I really believe that some of the smartest training advice that I ever read and then have been able to kind of pass along in my own way is that it is better to stop while you feel like you've got more in the tank so that you come back feeling ready to go. Or mentally, you're like, man, I cannot wait to get back in the gym. I feel great. That is way more favorable than beating yourself up, grinding yourself out, and then thinking, okay, I got to go do this again tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much easier to maintain motivation if you cut it off just a little bit short. You think about all the Netflix shows. That's their strategy. I mean, that's what they're doing. They
Correct.
give you that little taste at the end. You're like, oh, I'm ready for another show. Why? Because they gave you just enough. If it was too much, you'd say, it'll take a few weeks before I come and revisit this thing. So that's
media,
really,
media
to me,
101, man. Just
absolutely
leave them wanting a little bit more so they come back.
And I'll tell you, it is one of those things. People talk about motivation versus discipline all the time. You know, that's kind of a hot button discussion point. And like, yeah, the patterns that you have, the habits you have, of course, they're going to have a huge impact, more so than an ebbing and flowing motivation. But I'll tell you one thing that can help to keep that motivation up is if you stop your sessions just a little short, just a little shy. You're like, man, I feel great, done, walk away. I shouldn't leave the gym feeling like I just got totally destroyed, because that makes it that much harder, even if it's just incrementally, to get there the next time. And those little increments add up. And before you know it, you're like, man, I don't want to go do this. And that's a huge problem.
For sure. And to put it in some real world numbers that I think help people every now and then, I usually work out 5 times a week. And out of those 5 workouts, I actually really try to send it with what I would consider high intensity on 1 to 2 of those sessions. You know, sometimes it's 2, and even if it's 2, that's only 40% of the time. So it's less than half. And some days, some weeks, I just feel like sending it once. That's only 20% of the time. And I'll hit those other ones, let's say at a moderate pace, allow myself a low intensity day. And that allows me to have been doing CrossFit since about 2005 and not be burned out and not mind walking into the gym tomorrow. Now, you might be on a different cadence, but I think it's just important for you to allow yourself to start the exploration of finding what your cadence is going to be. Because if it's not sustainable, you know, then that's not what we want. We want to have you find some sort of a rhythm that we're still talking about how you're still working out 5 years from now. I mean, that's the whole goal right there. I will also say for Hannah, what's been another breath of fresh air in my training, and I've said this before on the podcast, is I at least one time a week, if not twice, I don't run the clock. And I understand the importance of data. You know, this podcast is hosted on the btwb platform, which is all about tracking and measuring your data as well. Like, I get it. But if I have to not run the clock once or twice a week and that keeps me in the game, then it's 100% the right thing for me to do. Because if I'm just doing everything right and burning it down and super intense guy and this, that, and 6 months later you check in, you're like, how's it going? You're like, oh, just hit a wall, haven't worked out in 3 weeks. Well, that's not what we're going for there. So again, I would just you get to find what works for you. There are general principles such as intentional variance, functional movements, understanding intensity. Those general principles serve a lot of people well. Now, how to make them fit for your personal life, Hannah, that's a little bit of an individual recipe.
Yep, for sure. Well, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about this injury angle, because I do think there's a lot of opportunity in there, even when it feels like it really sucks to be sidelined by anything. You know, it sucks to not feel good. It's hard when you got this thing that's very confronting that says you cannot do X, Y, and Z for a certain period of time. But there is a lot of opportunity in that. And one of the greatest articles in the old CrossFit Journal, in my opinion, was one, I believe it was called Working Wounded. And yeah. And I think that has informed my philosophy towards coming back from an injury more than almost anything else. And the basics of it are really simple. It's like, okay, your knee is broken and you're probably not going to be doing a lot of squatting and a lot of lower body movements and jumping and running. That's probably out for a little while. No problem. You're going to set some audacious goals for some other things that are not related to that and are probably also weaknesses. So for example, you know what? You are going to develop over the course of your quote rehab for your knee within that period. The goal is 20 strict L-sit pull-ups.
Yeah.
Get to work. Let's specialize for this period of time when you have to kind of be forced into this more narrow approach. Okay, embrace it. Let's get some things on the old journal that are a bit of a reach, that if you were to achieve, people would look at you and be like, wow, this person specializes in that skill set. Because you know what? When you're back to full capacity and you're healthy, you're going to be able to carry that with you and reintegrate it into the breadth of your fitness in a way that other people may not have had the opportunity because they're so focused on this totality. And so it's kind of an interesting way to turn lemons into lemonade, so to speak. And I'd encourage anybody to try to reframe their mindset if they're in that kind of injured place, because it sucks, you know, and I've been there. I know, Pat, you've been there as well. You know, give it enough time. I think most people have some sort of physical setback. And how you react to it is the important thing.
And that just sparked so many things in my mind that I'm sure any athlete in that situation could figure out, depending upon what you can do with that meniscus and what you can stabilize. The old L-sit's still there. I mean, how are the strict rain dips? I mean, it goes on and on and on that you could come. You don't have to let your fitness slide. Some things you'll have to go away from. And I also think that, you know, some people have what I believe is an antiquated and unnecessary fear of continuing to work the side that is uninjured. It's like, well,
absolutely,
this other leg is still okay, but I'm not going to do any, you know, assisted squatting, you know, thing with this good leg, because then this leg will look like it was born from, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and this other leg is going to shrivel away. And I've just never seen that happen in a real life human being. If anything, quite the opposite. I think it's highly beneficial to keep working the good side in an intelligent manner. And I think it will help you both physically and mentally as you try to maintain as much capacity as you can. And then once you get the green light to do full range of motion on both joints again, I think you'll have a faster road to recovery there as well.
100%, yes. But man, I think it's just a fun exercise to do. Kind of I'm like a dog with a bone with this. But I mean, even if you're not injured, you know, sometimes going down the what if road, it's like, okay, what if I couldn't use my legs for 2 months? What would I do? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to develop a 2-minute freestanding handstand. I'm going to, you know, be able to do deficit handstand push-ups strict. I'm going to be able to climb a rope multiple times without touching the ground. You know, like, you show me somebody that pursues those goals headlong with intent, even if you fall short of what you had kind of written down, I mean, man, you'd be a monster. So there's so many things worth pursuing. Even just the mental exercise of that, I think is cool. And you might find within that, if you're struggling with motivation overall, you might find something that you're like, man, I am fired up to try to dive into that particular goal. Awesome. Focus on that for a little while and see if it doesn't help get your headspace a little bit more in the game.
You know, I might mess this up a little bit, but there was a member of my community, Nicholas, up there in Canada, who was just out for a workout and broke his foot on the workout just in a bad step off a curb while out just running. Like, just took a bad step, you know, one of those things. And so bummed out. Love going below parallel, love doing all that stuff. And, you know, a ton of stuff was off the table. We actually had a conversation. And if I'm remembering correctly, one of his nemesis was a workout like JT. And his focus just became, I'm going to become an upper body pressing monster, you know, while I can't do this. And lo and behold, he did, and worked a whole bunch of other things. And, you know, the recovery once he came back wasn't anywhere near as gruesome, or he didn't lose as much as he thought based upon all these things that we're talking about. I would also encourage people, I'm looking it up right now on the old interwebs. We did way back, very not random, number 5, if you can believe it, was called Working Out with an Injury.
Yeah, and there you go.
And that one might be a good one to go back there as well. So I think you hit the injury thing pretty well. Maybe the one last thing I would say is, well, maybe 2. The one is, you know, not motivated and burned out. after we go through all these things, if let's say none of these ring true with you, it's actually okay to take a break from CrossFit.
For
It's
sure.
okay.
Yep.
Maybe you sound like an active person. Maybe you like to just run or hike or go biking or do yoga, or you just have a passion for kettlebells and you just want to go into that world for a little while and let your enthusiasm come back on its own pace. You should feel totally authorized to do that with like no CrossFit guilt or anything.
Yeah, for sure. And especially if you're looking at CrossFit in a sporting context, it's kind of interesting. I mean, most sports deliberately have an off season for that reason. They understand that you cannot just keep coming at this thing every day forever and then expect no endpoint and have people stay engaged. It's just unlikely. So yes, especially if CrossFit in your mind is being framed as sport, recognize that an off season is usually a good thing for most sports. So I totally echo that. I agree.
And the final thing that I'll touch on, and I don't think this has to be a long thing, and I think this is something you might chime in at as well, because when I think of skills, I think of you being 100x more capable than I am. One of the things that she said is that she's not getting new skills anymore. And something about that sounds weird to me. I can't put my finger on it, because either you're not getting new skills anymore because you've already mastered all of them that are out there, which is highly unlikely, and I don't think that's what she intended to mean there. But the acquisition of new skills, whether it's year 1 or year 10, that just comes down in my mind to dedicated, intentional practice. And so you might be at the point where you were a good athlete and you were able to pick up toes to bar in the class without too much this, and double unders came quick to you. And now maybe those relatively cheap and easy gains that come in the first few years, that fruit is off the tree. And now there are some other things that you've maybe wanted to acquire that, I don't know, muscle up or handstand walk, something that you're thinking you'd pick it up with the relative ease. You picked up some other skills, but you have not. That might be just another phase in your athletic development where to get those more sophisticated skills might be dedicated, intentional practice would be required.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's the tricky thing about skills is there's a big diminishing return effect. And depending on how skilled you are, it'll either come at you pretty quickly, but sooner or later, you're going to find yourself, like with so many things, once you get past that basic stage of proficiency, in order to really get expert at something, you're going to have to put a lot more time in it with a lot less return. It's just the way it goes. So don't let that discourage you. Just understand that, it's going to take a lot of effort to really move the needle continually.
So that's all I've got for Hannah. I think we hit all of our points pretty well, unless I'm forgetting anything. Anything still on your agenda to hit?
No, I don't think so. I just, I think a little time away, give yourself some headspace and don't fall into the trap of doubling down and trying to brute force your way through it. I think that's probably, if you can avoid that, there's lots of options.
So Hannah, hang in there. And then I will also say, because it just popped into my head as I close out here, you might want to give yourself some grace. We mentioned this in a previous show where there was somebody who, as they continue to age, every time they entered a new age bracket, 45 to 49, 50 to 54, they forgot about all their old numbers and said, this is a new phase, a new chapter. This is next time I back squat, it's a new PR as far as I'm concerned because of my birthday. Well, you just had something happen with your meniscus. You might recover perfectly like it never happened, or there might be something lingering, but you might want to take on that mindset of these are all post-surgery, new PRs, new this, new that. And it's fantastic that you still can get out there and use your body and do these things. So I'd give yourself a little slack, give yourself a little bit of a strike zone, and have some darn fun. We're just working out, right? We're not doing anything crazy here.
You got it.
This was, once again, a question from the community. As we like to say, this is everybody else's show. And Boz and I are just, we just chat about what's on your mind. So we want to hear from all of you. Hannah's question was great. If you have a question or a topic or a concern you'd like to see addressed, you can email it into the BTWB support team. You can post it on Instagram. You can go to the show on the BTWB YouTube channel, post it in the comments. If you have any input on what we've discussed today, please feel free to chime in and share your stories. More knowledge, more power. If you want to help support the program, go to the show notes under this on the BTWB YouTube channel. Check out all the VNR cycles, all kinds of get your first dip, 5 foot of handstand walk, first strict pull-up. There's really cool stuff there, barbell stuff as well. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. We will see you next week. For Adrian Bosman, I'm Pat Sherwood. See you then.